This last chapter is about development. Previously, we learned about the male reproductive system and how sperm is created and how it moves. And then we learned about the female reproductive system and all of its part and where the sperm is received. So remember that during oogenesis, the type of gametogenesis that females do to create ova, the egg has not quite completed meiosis. It's been arrested in meiosis 2. And so we have this secondary oocyte. And it's been released by, remember, day 14, you have ovulation. And if it goes into the fallopian tube and sperm has been deposited in the vagina, perhaps that sperm and oocyte will come together, and we call that fertilization. And that's where technically pregnancy will begin. And after about 38 weeks of a lot of cell division and a lot of growth and a lot of death, honestly, development of all the structures, the baby will be born, right? And so we do grow and develop. And so let's talk about those things separately, because a lot of people kind of use them synonymously. But growth is when you increase in size or number of cells. And that's the same thing, because if you have more numbers of cells, you're going to be larger as an organism. Development is going to be have growth in it, but aging, and it's constantly happening. In prenatal period is from fertilization to birth, and then postnatal is from birth to death, and we'll look at that closer in this lecture. So fertilization is when that secondary oocyte and sperm cell come together, and it happens in that fallopian tube, specifically in the pocket, the main portion of the fallopian tube called the infundibulum. And so I already mentioned that the secondary oocyte is ovulated and it's there in that fallopian tube. And the sperm has to travel from the vagina through the cervix, which often has a mucus plug there. And it has to kind of liquefy so that the sperm can get through that, go through all of that into the uterus, into the uterine tube, and find the egg. So what's interesting is it's going to take a lot of sperm to fertilize the egg, but only one's actually going to fertilize it, and you'll see what we mean in a second. So here you see ovulations occurring from this ovary, and these, I just lost the word, oh my God, fimbriae have moved the egg into the uterine. And so this is that infundibulum part. So this is where fertilization is actually going to take place. And look how far sperm had to go. Like here's the vaginal opening down here. You can't even see it. And this is the wall of the vagina, that muscle. And here's that cervix. And there is going to be some mucus to protect the body from bacteria. But at certain times of the month, that does get watery, and the sperm can move through that. And so they're going all the way up through the uterus, and I mean, they're just swimming everywhere, and they'll all surround this oocyte. So what happens is we have these layers, remember, around layers of cells around the egg, and one of them is the corona radiata, and then we also had the zona pellucida. And the sperm are going to have to get through those layers using those enzymes found in the acrosome of the sperm. And what happens is one sperm will kind of use the enzymes to break down a piece, and then another sperm will help out. And eventually they're kind of digging a hole through these layers of cells to get to the actual oocyte. And so eventually one sperm is going to be able to fuse its membrane with the oocytes, and then those nuclei can actually come together, and we have what's called fertilization. Now, once the head of a sperm is inside, the zona pellucida hardens, and this is going to keep other sperm from entering. We don't want too many nuclei or protonuclei in there, because that's going to give us too many chromosomes, and we're going to have major issues. as the sperm nucleus enters that oocyte, that's when the secondary oocyte finishes meiosis II. And remember, it makes a little polar body, but it also makes this large cell that has the nucleus. And we call these pronuclei until they come together. And then once they come together, we are done with fertilization, and we call this fertilized egg a zygote. It is no longer haploid, it is diploid, and it is a unique combination of chromosomes that has never existed before. So you can see here where we've got this corona radiata and the zona pellucida, and here are the acrosomal enzymes breaking through, kind of digging their way through all these cells, and then this sperm, notice just the head should go inside, the nucleus will go inside, and then this is, you can tell this is kind of paused in a phase of meiosis, and so it will be able to finish and those nuclei can come together. There is a lot of technology that help with people who have some infertility issues due to blockage or whatever reason the sperm and egg can't come together, and so intrauterine insemination and in vitro, and then even intrafallopian transfer. You can read about those if you want to pause the video. So pregnancy is this presence of this offspring inside you developing in the uterus, and it lasts, like we said, about 38 weeks, and it has these different stages. And so the pre-embryonic stage is once it's fertilized to about the second week. What happens is the cell is going to be constantly dividing, and when it does cytokinesis, the cleavage furrow forms, and now you have 2 cells, and 2 become 4, and 4 become 8, and 8 become 16, and 32, and 64, and 100 and something. I'm not great at math, but you end up with what's called a blastocyst, and then eventually gastrulation occurs, and you start to have this development of these membranes. And so cleavage is a fancy way of talking about how these cells divide, and then they kind of, depending on where the yolk is, how they'll distribute themselves, these cells. And the hollow ball that's about 16 cells is a morula, and when you're at that stage, each of those cells it's called totipotent. They haven't differentiated at all. And so what's neat is this is kind of where you could take a morula and pull one cell away, and it will divide to create another morula exactly like the first one. And so we might call these stem cells. And so you can also chemically entice these cells to differentiate into specific tissues to grow in the lab per se. It's also here that if this ball of cells gets separated at all, you're going to have identical twins. But blastocyst is a hollow ball, and so it's starting to develop a little more, and it's going to actually attach to the endometrium of the uterus, and it has this what's called inner cell mass where the embryo is going to arrive, and then you have this trophoblast, which are walls of the blastocyst that are actually going to produce human chorionic gonadotropin, that hormone, and that's what's going to keep our corpus luteum around, which will also make hormones. And so this is what usually is found with the pregnancy test. You're testing for these hormones that would only be there if the trophoblast was intact. And so here you see the oocyte getting fertilized, and then cleavage starting to occur where you have 2 cells, and then this is a solid ball, a morula. And so you can see this is happening, like here's fertilization, and finally the nuclei join, and now you have your zygote, and it's immediately doing cell division. And so we're getting to our morula stage, and then eventually blastocyst, and then a gastrula as cells start to invaginate and move in. What they're showing you here is this is going to implant. And remember, this is our endometrium. We've thickened it with our hormones, have told the endometrium to become very thick and well vascular in preparation for blastocyst implantation. And so it does secrete some enzymes to get into the endometrium and develops these microvilli that invade, and that way that it can get right? All these nutrients, oxygen, food, whatever. The food that's available in the yolk sac is depleting. And so this does occur between the end of the first week or into the second week, and it makes, like I said, the trophoblast starts making HCG. So our placenta starts to form from that endometrium and the cells surrounding the embryo. The placenta is a combination of mother and child tissues, and it attaches the embryo to the uterine wall, and this is where we can provide all the needs and get rid of waste for the embryo. And here you can see implantation happening. Really cool picture here. And I love this because you can see just how thick that endometrium is, and here is our fertilized egg. Now the chorion is a tissue made by the trophoblast, and it is the second layer of cells that lines the trophoblast, and we call it the outer extra embryonic membrane, and it is what helps invade the endometrium and has these chorionic villi. And then the placenta starts to develop. And for our class, we're not going to, I'm not expecting you to learn all of these terms at all, but chorion is a important tissue, and amnion is too. So it's this, if this is the first extra, that most outermost extra embryonic membrane, here's the second one, and it develops around the embryo around the second week, and it makes this amniotic fluid that fills up the space between the amnion and the embryonic disc. Remember, the group of cells that's going to be the embryo. This is going to help incubate the embryo. And so you do have a yolk sac, and it forms blood cells during early development, and you'll have embryonic hemoglobin there. There's an allantois. Again, this is forms a stalk, and then there's the placenta, which is from the chorion and the uterine wall, and this is going to again have both maternal and embryonic tissues. And of course, across the membrane is where diffusion occurs of the gases. And so this is, don't think this is the mother's huge belly, okay? That's not what they're showing here. This is just inside the endometrium. Not a great picture of it. But so here's the space of the uterus. Here would be the endometrium, and this is developing inside of it. And so you can see like the stalk, and this is going to be this is the amnion with the amniotic cavity right here. This little piece of tissue is going to be the embryo, and here's the embryo's yolk sac, which will eventually make blood. And this is just filled with amniotic fluid, and that's the chorion, the extra outermost extra embryonic layer. And here's the second one. Right next to what will be the embryo. And as this embryo starts to develop and the blastula turns into a gastrula as cells start to migrate, we end up with three what's called primary germ layers. There's ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. Ectoderm being on the outside, mesoderm in the middle, and endoderm on the inside. And then the amnion and the umbilical cord start to develop, and this is going to allow nutrients to feed the offspring and also eliminate waste. And it's all through diffusion right here. You can see this is like kind of muddy because oxygen's going from the mother to the fetus, and then waste is going the opposite way, like CO2 or nitrogen waste. And so here you can see the placenta is made of the chorion and the endometrium. So it's both fetus and maternal membranes. And this is just looking at how vascular the placental membrane is so that we can do diffusion of these gases and food. So I mentioned that gastrulation is this movement of cells making these multiple layers, and we end up with ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. And this is where all the organs are going to develop from, called organogenesis. And now we call it a gastrula because we've got these different layers that have occurred. And so it's kind of neat. They're showing you the endoderm, mesoderm, and ectoderm. Ectoderm's always colored blue. This is really hard to see. Mesoderm's always red, and endoderm is always colored yellow. And so that's kind of all the books you'll read. And so what the endoderm does make is things kind of, I think of on the inside. So your respiratory tract, epithelial lining of the digestion, pancreas, gallbladder, that stuff. Mesoderm stuff kind of in the middle, bone, blood, muscle, kidneys, reproductive system. And then ectoderm is stuff on the outside. And so it's going to be skin, your epidermis, right, hair, nails, and then the brain. Who knew? So we have different stages of your human development. We've got the zygote, where we have a fertilized egg. We have cleavage occurring, where mitosis is happening and the morula is forming. And then the cells start to differentiate and form a blastocyst. And then as these primary germ layers form, you have what's called a gastrula. And all this happens by the end of the second week after fertilization. So gastrulation is so important because where all that happens determines what the cells are going to do. Like I said, they're differentiated now. So you cannot take a cell from them and grow a whole nother. And that cell is already predetermined what it's going to be. The genes have been turned on and other genes have been turned off inside that cell. So its destiny has been decided. And so the cells of the ectoderm and endoderm are going to be your epithelial tissues, and the mesoderm is pretty much your connective tissues. So we've already mentioned this, but why not again? Ectoderm's in the nervous system and all of your skin and linings of the mouth and anus. Mesoderm is all the connective tissues, so blood, bone, muscle, also your lymphatic and reproductive and kidneys. And then endoderm is the lining of the inside, your urinary bladder, urethra, digestive tract, respiratory, and then pancreas and gallbladder. And this is showing the embryo developing at different stages. That's so awesome. The notochord and somites. And then 5 to 8 weeks development. And by the way, it goes this way. Just neat stuff when physical structures actually develop. Like I think about people, the bones of the ears haven't even developed, but they're talking to their baby. And I'm like, I can't hear you. Anyway, you don't have to tell people that. That kind of ruins some things. And then the fetal stage, and just, again, not testing you on this, but I thought you might be interested in it, of what is developing, what is happening during all of these months. And the body proportions over time for male and female. And what a full-term fetus might look like. And then the stages, again, with major events happening. The maternal changes is kind of what I want to talk about, because that secretion of the HCG, remember, is keeping that corpus luteum around, which is secreting estrogen and progesterone, which stops the FSH and LH. And without FSH and LH, you're not going to ovulate again. So that's why your reproductive cycle stops, your period stops. You don't want another egg. You don't want to get fertilized again. You don't want to get pregnant again, because these developing offspring are parasites inside that are stealing all your nutrients and oxygen, which is why eventually they have to come out or they're going to kill you. So those levels of HCG are really high, and then it starts to decline as the placenta takes over and starts making the estrogen and progesterone instead of the corpus luteum. So once established, the placenta does secrete large amounts of these hormones, and that's going to help maintain the uterine lining and still inhibit our reproductive cycle. Placenta lactogen stimulates your breast and mammary glands to develop. Relaxin, it comes from the corpus luteum and the placenta, and that's going to stop uterine contractions, make all your ligaments relax, which is why some women, like your feet get, you grow a half shoe size or whatever, and when you're pregnant, and they never get smaller because those ligaments were just loosened up. Aldosterone is going to promote sodium and water retention, and then PTH, of course, maintains the calcium concentrations. We don't want to take any calcium from the teeth or bones, so make sure you get a lot of that during pregnancy. So what causes the baby to be born? Well, as the baby starts to grow, the head pushes on the cervix, and that stretches, and that stretch receptors, that pressure tells the brain to release hormones, right? Oxytocin, so that the uterus can contract, which moves the fetus down more, which it's positive feedback here. This is one of the few cases we see positive feedback in the human body. The head being forced down causes the head to be forced down even more, which causes the head eventually until the stimulus is removed, aka birth. And so here you can see the birth process, and then the placenta also, the afterbirth. Human life could be up to 120 years, but most people are going to die from disease and injury before you reach 120 years. And I'll tell you this, like in my research, I've discovered that in the United States, we have the technology, medicine, education to live a long time. And because we live a long time, mistakes happen as we just get older, and that is how kind of cancer arises. So you don't see cancer in many countries where death happens at a young age because they haven't lived old enough to like develop cancer. They're dying from malaria or malnutrition or the tsetse fly or whatever. And so that's why we see a lot of cancer in countries where people live a long time. And so, let's see, it said the life expectancy is how long a person will live based on disease and studies of that area. And in the United States in 2014, males were projected to live almost 76 and a half years, and females 81 and a half. Of course, with technology, education, and advances, that can be longer. As far as this course, that is the end of Anatomy 2.